Partnering with hospice agencies is fairly easy. You go give an in-service, you talk to their case managers, social workers, creating a true partnership and making sure alignment is there. Put your caregivers in situations where they do feel comfortable to share what they're witnessing.
I really challenge caregivers and these home care companies to really look at what is the client's value and how do we align with that? Because what was happening is she was sending the caregivers home early because she really didn't enjoy the conversation and she couldn't necessarily engage in deep conversations.
You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. I'm David Knack, head of sales here at Disengage, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who've built amazing businesses and are super well respected. So I thought it'd be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of the biggest mistakes that they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. Welcome back to another episode of Home Care Hindsight, brought to you by Disengage. This is kind of a different episode today. I'm joined by returning guest, Gabby Pumpian. Hey, Gabby. And a brand new guest, probably to everybody who ever listens, by Nicole Soares. Guys, thanks so much for coming on the call today.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
I'm excited about this episode. It's going to be a little bit different. I think I'm going to call this on death and dying in home care. And so you guys introduce yourselves and we'll kind of dive right into things. Gabby, I'll start with you.
I'm Gabby, or Gabrielle Pumpian. I am here in San Diego, also with Nicole. I've been in the home care industry a long time and have had the honor and privilege to work with many families that are going through the end-of-life process. And I'm excited to bring some of that experience and wisdom and then ways now that I see from the outside, not working in a home care agency for the last 2 years, as a way to offer some support to our amazing community.
Yeah. And Nicole, introduce yourself.
Hi, so Nicole Soares. I own a company called Eco-Love Transitions, and I've been referring to it more as a one-stop death shop. The high level on what that means is I do everything from the advanced planning side, both medical and financial, and I do death support. So generally when somebody gets a terminal diagnosis, I come in as a doula and support them through that sacred journey, that sacred death journey. And then I do after death care, but very focused on eco-friendly after death care, getting ready to open my funeral home here on the coast in North County, so Encinitas area of San Diego.
And Nicole, I'm anticipating the immediate reaction of many of our listeners, which is like, what's a death doula and what do they do?
I think the easiest way to summarize that is bringing in a very heart-open, compassionate support system for the client and the family. I think there's so much missing, even though we have palliative care and hospice and the caregiving staff, which are all vital, important roles. A lot of times I think of it either as an event planner from like a wedding planner. I think of it sometimes as a quarterback, and just really bringing spiritual, emotional support. My background's in finance, so a lot of times these clients are working through some big financial challenges around medical bills. So anything and everything really a doula can do. Everyone specializes in something different, and I have to say I'm a pretty broad doula in where I come in. It can be supporting somebody who's choosing to end their life and mixing the medication through medical aid and dying. We can talk about that more later. But yesterday it was helping a husband who was really struggling with his wife's decision and working on acceptance and support.
Yeah, so the place that this podcast episode came from in the first place was a couple of weeks ago, Gabby, I called you and I was like, hey, I think here's this idea that I have for a podcast, which is like, let's talk about death and stuff. Because we have like this, uniquely Western problem, maybe certainly uniquely American problem of like, we don't think about death and we push death into facilities and hospitals and far away from the home whenever possible. And we kind of out of sight, out of mind. And I think that's part of why seniors tend to be really lonely, is because they're a lot closer to death than the rest of us. We don't want to think so much about that. And of course, like home care owners, people who work in home care spend so much more time thinking about and interacting with death than like the regular person. But we still have this kind of baggage as people in America of really thinking about death as little as possible, except for people like you, Nicole, who think about this a lot. And I'll just kind of share my the family lineage that I come from as it relates to death. I'll try not to be too long-winded here. But so on the one hand, my mom's mom, Mama, her name was Eula, was like obsessed with death. Would go to funerals on the reg, was her favorite thing to do. She picked out her own casket. It was like dusty pink. I mean, was just dialed in on picking out all the trappings of the funeral and stuff. And the other side of things, my dad's side of the family is Irish Catholic. Our prevailing philosophy is, I have all these feelings and I'm going to keep them right here. And then one day I'll die. And that's how we deal with things. And so it's this funny kind of balance of one side of the family that's all in on death and dying and thinking about it and talking about it and planning for it and stuff. And then the other side of the family that wants nothing to do with any heavy emotions. And I don't know if you knew this, death sometimes brings some of those. And so that's kind of the world that I come from, and have this kind of like avoidance mentality towards it sometimes. And also like, hey, we should really talk about this a lot more because it seems to be kind of important. And like all of us may have to do something about it at some point or another in the future. Nicole, I want to hear a little bit from you of like your journey, not to just be a guy on a podcast talking about death, but like to make this like your one-stop shop, to make this your business.
Two major things happened to me 7 years ago. My best friend, been best friends since high school. My brother used to date her, and we always joke when they broke up, we kept her.
Sure, smart.
Still love my brother too. But she just was blonde, blue-eyed. There was 4 of us girls in the family and 1 brother, and she just looked like us. And she just became a best friend to me and my little sister, and we were inseparable. And about 7 years ago, she was in a boating accident, and they removed a golf ball size of her right brain, which controlled her left side. So my sister and I go to Flagstaff, Arizona. We sit through the surgery with the family, and finally the ICU doctor comes and sits down with us, and he said, you guys cannot leave this room until one person is designated to make her medical decisions. We need to have some things signed. And the family just looked at me and they said, can you do it? And I was running a business. I've always been in financial services, and I was building spreadsheets of terminology, things that I wasn't familiar with the doctors would use so that I could research it. And I said, absolutely. I felt like I was the best person in the room to do that. So one of the very first forms I signed was to put in a feeding tube. And in Arizona, once you put in a feeding tube, you need a court order to remove it. And that's a really big deal. And so here we are, 7 years later. She still requires 24/7 care. And she was the most athletic, active, adventurous soul. And I still question whether that was the right decision. And I say that not because I live with regret, but it's really motivated me to really care about having advanced plans, even when we're young and healthy. And that's really become a big part of my commitment and work that I do is completing advanced plans and guiding people through it. So with some of the statistics I learned is less than 30% of us have one. And then only 3 out of 4 of them in a hospital environment will actually be honored. So not only even if you have one, if the medical team's not willing to honor it because they're for profit and those doctors feel losing a life is against their commitment to medicine, we just have so many challenges. And so we need a healthcare agent, which again is what I was providing for my friend, to really know what those person's wishes are so that they can advocate for them. They do not sign and authorize things that are against what they know that person wanted. That's really the original motivation. About 4 years ago, both my parents died of COVID a couple weeks apart. It was really the first time I'd seen death firsthand, and they were not good deaths. They're in their 70s, they weren't healthy, and nothing was prepared. And here we are, 5 kids, completely divided politically, in so many ways. And so it's really had a big impact on our relationship as the 5 kids left behind. So when I started going down my own spiritual development path, I realized I could hold space for people that are dying, and that I'm very deeply committed to helping people have good deaths, and that looks different for everybody. And I'm okay with holding space and honoring what each person wants and really listening. And it's just a beautiful gift that I get to give to the world. And again, it was because I didn't get that when I needed it.
Yeah, I have like a couple of follow-up questions here. The first is like, when in the process did you find out that the court order is required to remove a feeding tube in Arizona?
We knew at the time. Yeah, but I didn't have the capacity. I didn't have anyone sharing with me what it really meant. I just save my friend. Do whatever you
sure.
can.
Totally.
Yeah. And, what was really difficult is then we had nobody to care for her coming out of a hospital for 4 months. By the way, it was $1.5 million in medical bills. We had all these things. So I was managing her finances and her medical. So my sister quits her job. And for 2.5 years, she moves her into her home and she teaches her everything that she's capable of relearning.
Yeah.
It was a just amazing full-time 24/7 job. So I would come in and do respite care because I'm back in California. So I buy a Sprinter van so that every other week I can come to Arizona and I can help take care of my friends so my sister and her family can have a break. It was a really big caregiving responsibility and just, it was really heavy work. And I'm no longer her active medical and financial agent. That's been passed down to a family member now. And I just know that this was a gift and part of my path of knowing what it feels like firsthand so that I can really honor other people and just help people plan, because it's such a peace of mind. And then once you have a plan, it's easier to talk about. To your point, we have such a death-averse problem in America. The funeral industry has hidden it from us, which is why I care and want to have a funeral home, is I want it to be front and center. I want people to be educated on how damaging fire cremation is to our environment and why we should plan. And so I really want to make it very open and honest and give people space to have these hard conversations.
Something that's new for me that you've said is that oftentimes just because you have some kind of advanced directive, that doesn't mean that it's going to get followed. And so tell me more about that. Because I was chatting with someone and they were like, "You're kidding." And I was like, "I guess. I don't know anything else. So now I'd like to know."
There's two parts to an advanced directive. Advanced directive is specifically the medical side of your wishes, okay, or your instructions. There's the healthcare agent assignment, and that is a legal document, right? We notarize it and we say, okay, Gabby is my healthcare agent. If something happens and I'm incapacitated, I ask for her to step up and act on my behalf. The wishes are wishes, right? Yes, it's part of a legal document, but I'm going to give you an example. Let's say I say that my minimum life threshold is that I don't want to live if I can't toilet by myself. Seems a little ridiculous, right? But maybe I live alone and I don't have money for caregiving and I don't have a support staff and I live in a non-communal way, right? And so for me, that's just a deal breaker. I don't know too many doctors when I go to the emergency situation and here I am, 51, healthy, that's going to look at that and honor that. To cut off my food and water to allow me to die naturally in the next 7 to 14 days, let's just say. So it's just they're guidelines. And there's no way to document every specific possible scenario. So we look at it and say, okay, this is their minimum life threshold and this is what they're asking. But what about this situation? This one's a little bit unique and it's not accounted for. And that's where the healthcare agent needs to speak with the medical team and the family and go, what exactly would she have wanted in this situation? And then we do our best to guess. And then we all get to live with that decision for the rest of our lives, right?
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I'm just weighing in a little bit on thinking about this from a home care agency perspective. There's so many things, but just right now with the advanced planning are most home care companies during their assessment process asking questions about the basic advanced planning and what has been done and then identifying what could be done? And I bet the answer is not everyone. And what if you made it like a requirement in a way like you would collect a credit card? Because in a sense, if you don't know who's responsible, and you can flag it, it's not appropriate for every case, but any case that's a hospice case, any case that has a terminal illness case, a cancer case, a Parkinson's case, you have to flag that and talk about it, just like you're talking about how much it's going to cost you and what credit card or what account is going to be paying it.
So an advanced directive often feeds to a pulse when somebody has a terminal illness. Okay. Right. So the physician, and it's actually been renamed as a pulse, but the reason it's the physician order form is because it's signed off by a doctor. So that becomes it, and it's an immediate order, right? An advanced directive says only if I'm capacitated will this go into effect, where a pulse is a physician signed document that they've agreed on that this is going to happen, and it's an immediate document that goes into effect. So generally, especially in assisted living, generally, most of them are going to be looking for a pulse. It's a peak form, and the peak form is going to be posted up in their hospital room. I'm not going to pretend to know every detail about this, but this has just been my experience. So just keep that in mind, please. Now, hospice is a little bit different because generally they've chosen comfort care. Right. So a post will clearly state they don't want life-sustaining support. It's comfort care. But before that situation, before hospice, there's a lot of gray areas. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm working with an 85-year-old client that's just, they have decided their life is complete. And I actually want to use this term, and we can talk about it when appropriate. But there's many people, and there's a doctor out of UK who's since retired. His name, I believe, is Michael Irwin. And he talked about how some people just have kind of this definition of my life's complete. And there's a whole variety of reasons why that is. Maybe a lot of their family and loved ones have died, their partners died. They have a bunch of comorbidities, but nothing that really classifies them as terminal. And they're just done. Okay. In that situation, they're not terminal, and they may not even have a pulse. And so an advance directive may or may not be within a facility, but generally, hopefully a family member. But I think that's where we go to that 30%. I'd say 30% of the time, that number is a factual number that they will or they won't have one. It's often not required, I would say, until a pulse is required because they meet that type of criteria. But in that 85-year-old, something on an advanced directive that might be appropriate would be if I was to get pneumonia or a UTI, a urinary tract infection, and generally the medical procedure would be give this person antibiotic. They might say, I want to use this as a life-exiting event, and I want my body just to be allowed to decide how it's going to process it. If it can fight it, I recover. And if not, then it's an exit. I mean, that used to be known as the grandmother's gift or something. I should know what it's called, sorry. But it's just, that's how we used to die, right? Before we had antibiotics, that's what would kill people. And so that would be a great advance directive item for somebody who just says, this is an option for me. I want to refuse something and allow that to be my final exit.
Yeah. Gabby, I want to hear a little bit about kind of your journey to feeling, really comfortable having conversations with people about death. And then I'm going to get into some really tactical stuff of different parts of people's businesses and how they come into contact with different stakeholders. Just some ways to apply conversations about death, language about death, actual practices, meditative kinds of stuff, spiritual kinds of stuff that people could apply in their business today. But so tell me, Gabby, a little bit about kind of your journey into having these conversations out there in the world.
I think the biggest was a mindset shift of just not running from the fear of death. In the last 5 years, it's become very front and center because both of my parents have been diagnosed with diseases that would hasten the death potentially. And so I think a lot of people aren't comfortable or even know where to begin until they've had some kind of personal experience. But when you work in home care, and especially when you are trying to work with more families, really no matter what their situation is, as long as we can see out their wishes, whether that's independence in their own home, they never want to move, whether that's they want to have a caregiver at their bedside while they're in the hospital that can advocate for them and keep them comfortable and less stressed so that their recovery can happen. There's so many roles that, professional caregivers play with families. And it's important to make sure that we see these unique situations as these very miraculous events that only happen when you're born and really when you die. And so it takes a lot of effort, I think, to pay attention. And I think was being kind of faced with my parents' mortality, and it happened very suddenly. Both of their diagnoses happened within a week. Wow. But luckily we had somewhat prepared with a hard conversation a little bit earlier, which in my work, I was years into this industry or more. And I was like, I don't want to be a statistic. I don't want to be one of these families that that's avoided these conversations. In my work, I was out talking to hospitals, how do I bring this up? I was talking to estate planning attorneys. What's the best way to talk about this with my mom and dad? Talking to financial planners. How do you help people, hypothetically, like my parents, plan for the end of life or for their retirement, And so just really leaning into the reality. But I think it started with a little bit more of a personal moment.
Yeah. Well, I think this has been really good conversation so far. I want to get super specific about the different types of stakeholders that exist in each of these agencies and how we can, take care of or better prepare ourselves to have these kinds of conversations in a productive and a helpful kind of way. We've got these different stakeholders within the business, and I'm going to kind of loosely structure it as like yourself or maybe your staff members, your caregivers, your family members of your clients, and then of your clients. And so let's start with yourself. There's kind of a, put on your own mask before helping others airplane kind of analogy here. But my hypothesis is if we're not fully integrated as people in a way that we can think about this in some way, like we're not going to be perfect, like we're still going to have all the baggage of who we are as people and the kind of place that we find ourselves in, but thinking about how can we approach death, thinking about our own lives and help our team members in the office think about death in their own lives and in their own families in a way that kind of gives us a foundation with which to interact with other people who are coming in with their own set of baggage. And so, Gabby, I know you had kind of a good starting place of this as it relates to the inconvenient truth that is death is a real bummer as it relates to revenue.
It is. And Nicole has had a recent experience. I'm excited for her to share too. But yeah, I mean, let's face the hard truth. When you work in a home care company, and especially in the sales role, but in any kind of internal role where you're looking at numbers and you're understanding the health of the business, which leads to bonuses and, all the good things and the camaraderie and the culture that you're building in your agency, when you hear that you've lost 2 24/7 clients, most people get a little bit of a pit in their stomach. Yep. And one of the ways that I think is a quick go-to now that I can recommend that I practiced more later in my career when I was doing well and numbers weren't so up and down, but not every agency and not every business is that, that advanced. And so you lose 2 24/7s, you're like, great, there's 30 grand a month or 40 grand
Sure.
a month revenue, 50 grand a month, gone. Now what? And like for that to be the initial thought when you hear that 2 souls, two people have died, that makes it really difficult to then be able to support your caregivers, ask them questions, pause, help them understand grief, understand it for yourself, like acknowledging versus running away and being in denial. And of course the revenue matters in a business, but let's not let that be the first thought we have. And you have to build practice around it. And I think that there's some things that are pretty easy to do that don't take a lot of time, but are well worth the effort in order to really shift into the humanity of someone passing away.
Nicole, we were chatting a little bit before we started recording about the inconvenience to the business model. And I keep putting it that way because it's like, it is really inconvenient when clients die. Like it would be great if they did not, because it would make the business a lot easier to run. And hopefully I don't sound too irreverent to the people listening. You guys know me by now. But it's just what we do in this business is just a little silly to me sometimes. It's just such a crazy business model to try and make sense. And so anyways, Nicole, as you interact with caregivers and home care agencies, how do you think about the kind of conflicting incentives between taking care of people, whatever that means for them in terms of a good death, alongside the inconvenient reality that like we bill on hours, and if someone dies, we don't get any more hours?
Isn't this just our dilemma in general with business?
Yes.
That we're seeing more and more corruption and fraud and lack of priorities that really are humane. I mean, this is just every day in the news. So yes, this is probably an industry that's hit harder than normal because we have so many people dying. So yesterday I was speaking to a group of hospice/home care. They own both under one umbrella. And it was really beautiful to be able to share where a doula can provide support and how we can work together. And this particular group did not support end-of-life options such as dying with dignity, like medical aid in dying. And I talked to them a lot about voluntary stop eating and drinking. And so when somebody feels they have a completed life, and or if their advanced directive says they don't want to be spoon-fed, and yet they're unable to feed themselves, or whatever their criteria is for their minimum life threshold, then voluntary stop eating and drinking, which we call VSED, is the solution that, again, a doula can help support, but it's against policy. And why it's against policy is what I struggle with. But I gave this very meaningful, heartfelt kind of overview, and nobody would speak up. And I thought, gosh, did I just really bomb this? What happened? And I got at least 3 phone calls after and text messages saying, I'm so aligned with you. I am so sick of seeing these people suffer and being ignored when they're telling us they want, and we're not giving them the solutions that you can come in and offer. And what I reassured them is I don't come in and just say, oh, great, you want to die? Let me help you with that. I come in and I look at, what can we do to improve their ability to intentionally live each day and find joy in each day, right? I really do care about life and making life meaningful, but I also care about honoring each person's values and wishes, and I have that solution too. And so I think their inability to speak up was because it was such an important thing for each of them to drive revenue. And it made several people very torn as to how they could work with me, and almost felt like they needed to secretly work with me on the side because it was going to be somewhat frowned upon because it didn't align with their primary objectives. To me, a primary objective, I don't know if you guys have a background in Six Sigma, but my primary objective for this would be revenue, and my secondary objective would be human experience or suffering. And how do we focus on our primary metric without negatively impacting our secondary metric? And that's something I think we should be measuring, but my gut is telling me that's maybe not what they're doing.
And I think so many of the people that I know have the foundational belief that, like, if you take care of people, people take care of the business. And that's very much trickles down to the way that they think about caregivers. There's often an intention execution gap there. But I think the same can be said of the way that we approach death, and not necessarily maximizing the lifetime value of each of our clients, but, holding space for the fact that there are times where our relationship with our client has run its course. And sometimes that happens on its own, but other times in certain states, and we can get into this. This will probably be part 2 of the episode, is what's coming down the pike in terms of where is, voluntary stopping eating and drinking and other kinds of assisted death kinds of models. Like, where does that exist today? And how do people prepare for that likely expanding and further its reach? So, but I think, Nicole, one of the things I'm hearing you say is, like, just like you'd have other referral sources, just like you'd have other professionals in your network that you can refer your clients to, that you can reach out to for help, it would be a good idea to get to know a death doula and be able to have a relationship to where you can bounce ideas off of them and get their insight on all the times that they've seen folks going through this part of the journey.
Yeah. And you're right. This is where partnership and referrals are so important, because I can tell you when I have a client that I need to be put on hospice, I'm going to refer to a hospice that I know aligns with what I believe the human need is. I'm not going to refer out to one that I think is so focused on revenue that they're missing, the humanity part. And so the partnership is so key. And remember, my clients all die. I mean, not that all of our clients don't die, but like, I'm in for the shortest amount of time probably for all of these different businesses. And I am constantly getting referrals because they see the value, and they see the value. Yeah, the value for the client. And so, and the families. So it comes, your point is valid, David. It comes from doing the right thing.
Yeah. I want to shift a little bit and talk about how we can equip our caregivers, because I think there's a lot of times where we are involved in maybe the first time a caregiver has seen someone die, has seen a dead body. And so how do we prepare our caregivers ahead of time? How do we acknowledge the fact that a client passing away, like it's a revenue loss for the business, is also typically one of the kind of moments in a caregiver's employment life cycle where we can lose them because we don't get them restaffed to a case quickly enough. They've got to make money at the end of the day. Gabby, would love to hear from you what you've seen work as it relates to preparing caregivers from this, both in terms of like logistics, but also in terms of the kind of like emotional, like wraparound kind of support that we can offer.
Yes, there's a few traditional ways. Partnering with hospice agencies is fairly easy. And most of those easy ways are you go give an in-service, you talk to their case managers, social workers, you make sure that your name is on their list. But usually it dies after that. And so I love what Nicole was saying around creating a true partnership and making sure alignment is there. And the hospice agency may not know how to do that best with a home care agency. And so it's important to offer ways that you're going to actually have a true partnership. How can they participate in the training that you want to provide your caregivers? Maybe your caregivers will hear it feel it, feel seen, and feel heard in that training by a hospice professional, a chaplain, a death doula, versus the recruiter doing the training, or even the HR director doing the training. I mean, put your caregivers in situations where they do feel comfortable to share what they're witnessing and hear the language. And so, trainings, I think, is the number one thing you can do, but that's only part one, right? The second part is really incorporating this into your culture. And if you're an agency, you look back in your revenue or your payer mix, your referral mix over the last year, we're coming into the end of 2025, so people should be doing this, right? If you have whatever you want to say, 10% or more hospice clients or hospice referrals, and then you reflect and say, wow, we actually don't have a partnership process, or we don't have a process built around these types of clients for our staff, maybe that's one improvement you could look into next year and consult someone like Nicole to help you build that. What is meaningful?
I have something I can add to that. And I don't know if I shared this story with you guys yet. I working with a care facility, and for somebody, the client has early dementia. So they come in and help with, one of them helps with the meds, and one of them just kind of wipes down and keeps her a little bit company. Well, when I sat down with this client, one of the things I like to do early on is an assessment on what are your values, interests, and abilities, and really look at that on a regular basis, because with somebody with dementia, obviously capacity is going to be decreasing over time. When we sat and looked at and did that exercise, what we found is that she actually really wanted to be doing water aerobics twice a week. And she really felt it, with the apathy, she really felt it difficult to really get ready and go do that. So I worked with this care facility, and I said, is there any caregivers that would be interested in doing water aerobics? And we did. We matched her up with one that was so excited. And now twice a week, that caregiver gets in the water and does water aerobics with her. And that's what the client needed to actually do it. What the client was doing, by the way, was up to 10 hours a day of crime TV on her phone and her TV. So what that was doing was greatly increasing her anxiety, right? Then she was smoking more weed, an older woman, then she found weed to be, this tool to help her with her anxiety, but then that caused all kinds of other side effects. And with somebody with a dementia, actually, reducing the oxygen to the brain could really compound and increase her or decrease, her brain function. And so it was something so simple. So I really challenge caregivers and these home care companies to really look at what is the client's value and how do we align with that? Because what was happening is she was sending the caregivers home early because she really didn't enjoy the conversation and she couldn't necessarily engage in deep conversation. So it was challenging for her. She felt less than because she realized the conversation skills were lacking when she just wanted to be in the water. It was so beautiful.
The one other thing that I just want to kind of mention here, and this may be something that we're going to pick back up on part 2 as well. Many of us are in agencies where a large part of our caregiving population are immigrants who bring in a culture from outside of the US. And I think that certainly introduces like some complexity between, you get your clients, you get your client's family, and you've got a caregiver, and they're all coming with their own set of background. But I also think that there's ways that at the very least we need to acknowledge that our caregivers, some of them are coming from a different place than grew up in the US with all the things that we've already been discussing, and identify if there are ways that like our caregivers' cultural background can be an asset to our agency, and we can find a way to like incorporate the resources that they bring to the table within the ways that we're serving our clients and caregivers, or our clients and their families, because our caregivers may be better at this than we are in some ways. And I think that's something that's probably worth like acknowledging and turning them loose within certain respects to be able to really be authentically themselves.
I never thought of this, David, but I love what you're saying. I would love sitting with a caregiver 4 hours a day if I was a patient. Like, teach me some Spanish, teach me something about your culture, teach me, make me some dish that's like a favorite dish and tell me about it. I love that.
Yeah, I think there's like a sense of like, some ability to travel without being able to travel.
In the visualization, right? So we playing like
Yeah.
the meditation and visualization with that, which is really fun. So meditation keeps coming up for me because as a doula, that's really a big practice of mine on a regular basis throughout the day when I feel like I need to center. And I have one company that I work with. It's not a home care company, but it's a company that I highly respect. They do a meditation every day at noon for 10 minutes. And the staff is encouraged to participate, call in if they're remote, but they do this beautiful 10-minute meditation. And I just think that that's really special. Can you imagine putting that on speaker and asking your patient if they'd like to listen as well? How centering and beautiful is that?
That's amazing.
And that's, that's like 10 minutes a day to impact everybody in your organization, potentially.
Yeah. And it may not be a practice that you're used to yet, and it might feel really foreign. And so that could be a great way to get you started into a meditation and mindfulness practice.
I love that, first of all. I think it just comes back to leadership really evaluating what practices are you currently doing with your caregivers. And if that is not much, then let's prioritize that. We see so much turnover in this industry. Caregivers get burned out. They prioritize the third other agency that they're working for. And when it comes to this really sacred moment when you're, again, like you're bearing witness, you're providing care, emotional support, it's not just toileting. Oftentimes these caregivers are then helping prepare the body. And we know this, and they may be great at it. Like to David's point, we can learn so much from them. But how are you supposed to learn if you're not connecting with them about what they're doing, about how this made them feel, about what they need, asking them what they need now that the person has passed? How do we incorporate what you're going through into our collective because our company cares about you? Not just, oh, your client died, great. Are you available on Saturday to take this 12-hour overnight? I mean, let's just like get a little bit clearer, I think, on these practices, because would you treat that to like that same level of just thinking about the person as a revenue or something when a baby's born? You know, it's the same kind of moment. These are sacred moments. We only get one act of dying in our life.
Yeah.
Like, how could we just at least pause a little bit more? And I think it comes from the leadership. The leadership has to incorporate opportunities, whether it's a 10-minute meditation every day or even once a week, whether it's creating a ritual. I've worked with teams where we've gone and we've planted trees, or we've donated a tree in a national park or a plot of land, and then we've followed up with the family. And so it's just acknowledging that if you do work with a lot of families where a loved one is passing, which, like you said, most of our clients are, because they're often in that stage of life, it's our job to really sit with our caregivers who are doing the actual work, witnessing that.
I just had a thought, Gabby. Like, I can't imagine as a caregiver, you're only given so much time to support a particular client because you need to move on to the next one. And you're walking away when that client's crying or screaming or asking for you, and you have to walk away and you have to ignore them. I see that so often in assisted living facilities where patients are crying and they're just completely ignored. And I understand we just don't have capacity to sit with them for hours at a time. But I can only imagine, for me personally, having to do that, how challenging that would be for me.
Or the caregiver just needs to feel safe in asking for what they need. I just got massive chills, by the way. And it reminded me of a client I had at my former agency who was alone, a veteran, hadn't gotten out of bed in a long time. The hospice company referred us in. And then at his last moments, the caregiver was supposed to leave. And I lived kind of nearby, and I remember it was like a Friday night, and I said to my husband, I'm not gonna, if that caregiver needs to leave, I'm going. Like that man is not gonna die by himself. And the hospice company, unfortunately, was not showing up. They were not supporting the caregiver. But that caregiver asked permission or reassured her care manager when he's like, do you gotta go? She said, no, I will stay. I'm going to stay. And, it wasn't a matter of, are you going to get OT or any, no, it was the right thing to do. And I felt like, okay, she's staying, that is the right thing to do. Let's just pause and just do the right thing. But having the leadership and the culture of the company, creating a space for people to feel safe to do that, especially when there's a language barrier.
Yeah.
What if the caregiver English is a second language and they're in this moment of witnessing and they're alone? How are we checking in? It's really, really important. And this is really a nice time, I think, of year. Like, we're coming into fall. We often see a tick up of clients going into the hospital and passing around Christmas, New Year's, because many people, they want to give themselves that time or whatever. I'm sure, Nicole, you have 100 stories around. I find that the winter becomes a different time of year, and even in San Diego, when the weather doesn't change.
Sure. Yeah, it's the same.
It's part of the cycle. It's a part of our cycle of life, just like
Yeah.
nature. This is where death occurs, right? Our
Yes.
leaves fall, the nutrient for the soil is happening during that time. So yeah, more people die, during the colder times, during the winter times, for sure. But some of the things that came to my mind when you were saying that is, so do they, first of all, hospice doesn't provide caregiving, right? So I hear your point, but at the end of the day, that's not their job. And so if the family's not there and they don't have paid caregiving, a lot of people die alone. And it is really frustrating. That's a whole nother issue that we don't get to solve, unfortunately. If people can't afford private caregiving, which is what, we're talking about, they're alone. And so many people, and again, we die the way we live. If we're not going to be in community and we're not going to be surrounded by a support team, then often that is the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think taking a step back, like, what a gift that our people are in this business where they get to stand in the gap, where family is not able to be there for one reason or another. They're not able to be there 24 hours a day. There's so many people who are family caregivers. They're taking care of their loved ones, but they need a break. They've got to go to work. Like, the realities of life don't stop just because somebody's dying. And so while we've certainly identified some of the gaps that exist with respect to how our home care agencies can approach death and dying and conversations with their caregivers and kind of internal monologue, like, the big picture of this is like, what a sacred kind of responsibility that our people have. And, nobody's going to do this perfectly. Nobody's going to do this 100%, but there are resources available. And I'm actually, since we're kind of getting towards almost the 50-minute mark, it's getting long, we're going to save the other two kind of topics we wanted to discuss for part 2 of this. But I wanted to kind of just wrap up with some takeaways from today. I feel like I have learned a lot. And I think if I were thinking about, how to better serve my caregivers, instituting some kind of ritual. And it doesn't matter to me if it's planting a tree, or if it's doing a daily meditation, or it's doing weekly office hours where someone's available for a couple of hours on a Thursday. And if if you're losing a client, or if you've lost a client, an opportunity, and even if it's not because the client passed away, but it's because the client went to a, higher acuity level of care, and you're still feeling the loss of that relationship. And of course, you're kind of anticipating the grief of the thing. Anyways, I think all of that of create not just a thing that we do, but a when we do it, is such an important way to make this, if it's not happening consistently and it's not happening on purpose, it won't happen, because we're going to find other stuff that we want to deal with instead of that.
I want to add 2 things, if you don't mind,
Sure.
that we didn't get to cover. One is, I think it's really important to allow our caregivers to express emotion. And I don't know what the policy and procedures are around that. As a doula, I ask them to step out from maybe aside from the patient and come into a neutral room. And that's where we'll process what's coming up for them. And I'll walk them through a compassionate inquiry process from Gabby Mate to really work on that, because the last thing we want to do is allow that to get stuck in our body if we can't express it. So that's something that, I'd love to learn more about, Gabby, on kind of how that works in caregiving. And to your point, David, if it's not going to be there in that moment, to given a safe place where they can process the emotion. The other thing I would say is, you alluded to this as well, is we can look at this problem or the situation from a negative, or we can look at it from a positive. This is such a beautiful time to be with somebody. It is so sacred and so amazing. And so I think it's really important on how we frame this caregiving and this death journey, that it is a gift. And if we change our story to the gift of it and an honor to be there, then that is really the story that we walk away with. And that's the emotion emotion and the actions that we take that are in alignment with our thoughts. And so I think that's why it's so important that from a leadership standpoint, we are framing this as a positive and as a gift and an honor, and really getting them to stick with that story. Now, it's fine that we still feel emotion and we feel sad and we feel resentful or angry, whatever that emotion is, then we need to process that. But the story from the top needs to be how grateful and honored and all of that this is to be a part of.
Not everyone is good or comfortable at having these types of emotional check-ins, conversations. It may not be the HR person, it may not be the scheduling manager. And so I think it's important to identify who in the office, who on the team. It may not be the owner, they may not be the best person. Maybe they're not the best emotionally connected, and that's just fine, right? But identify someone on your team and work with them to really take hold of this role and be that kind of continuum and create that consistency. Because if it's farmed out to anyone and everyone, it's not going to happen. And we want to take accountability, and then we want to incorporate that person's role, the specialty that they're doing, into the team and into the culture and into the conversations around their clients and their caregivers. And so home care agencies are getting really creative at elevating the caregivers on their teams that are just exceptional, that they see these strengths and they want to leverage them, in a different type of role than just one-on-one with a client. And so be on alert for maybe a type of specialist, in your office, and then let that person develop a good relationship with death doulas and people in the community that then you, Nicole, would have a point person that is going to get it and is going to make sure what you need is done and with whom in the right way. And so it's just not every nurse is going to be a labor and delivery nurse. Not every nurse is going to be. My husband's a nurse. He's tried all different types of nursing. He did 6 months as a hospice nurse. It was probably one of the most profound 6 months, but he learned that is not the type of nursing he wants to continue to do. So not everyone is made for this, and I think that is my takeaway. But what can you do to kind of lean in a little bit in your own life and in your own way to start getting a bit more comfortable with death?
Yeah, I was in the Bay Area last week and I took a all-day grief workshop. And so I can visualize using some of the tools that we use during that grief workshop, which we applied music to, as every time I would process a death, to be able to work through an exercise. And it's about a half an hour exercise. So I could see kind of that train the trainer, where they get trained on a modality or a way of processing grief. And then each time maybe there's a death, maybe a caregiver is taught how to do it once or twice, through that train the trainer. But then maybe over time it's a practice that they use on their own in order to process it. And they don't need that side-by-side support each time.
Yeah, and that could be as simple as, and I don't know if you guys have heard of this book, but On Grief and Grieving by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, right? I mean, she's like the founder of this 5 stages of grief. And so how can you incorporate that messaging, that reality, that science, that understanding into training your caregivers?
Yeah, that's a great place to end part 1. We're going to come back with part 2, where we talk a little bit more about the client and client's family facing piece of this. And then Nicole is also going to share some of the details about how medical aid in dying is making an impact already in parts of the US and Canada, but kind of educating everybody on what that looks like today in some places and what it's likely to look like in other places, in the near future. So you guys, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you guys leaning into this conversation and look forward to part 2. On behalf of the team here at Disengage, thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. Leave us a rating while you're there. It helps other people find the show. If you have comments on the show, drop me a line, david@zengage.com. Would love to hear from you, chat with you there.